It all came crashing down in a single night. Cameras flashed in my face, reporters shouting my name from every direction. I could barely see, barely breathe as I tried to push through the crowd. My chest was pounding, and I remember thinking, how did it all end up like this? Then Hannah's voice pierced through the noise. "She stole everything from us!" she screamed, her face twisted with fury. I turned, and I saw Margaret, frail, trembling, her cane shaking in one hand while the other clutched at her chest. And in that moment, I knew. Betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people you once called family. Silence. Now it's just me, alone in a dark room. The only sound is the clock on the wall, ticking louder and louder, as if it's keeping time with my own heartbeat. I lower my head, my voice barely more than a whisper. But all of this, it started with a Thanksgiving dinner. I can still see Margaret's smile that night, gentle, warm, suddenly broken by a fit of coughing. Her hand pressed tight against her chest. I didn't realize it then, but that night wasn't only the beginning of my story. It was the beginning of her countdown, too. Tick, tick, tick. I'm 28 years old. Just a regular accountant with a small apartment and a stack of bills on my desk. But my childhood was anything but regular. I grew up in foster care, and eventually I was placed with the Thompsons. On the surface, they looked like the perfect family. Robert and Susan, the respectable parents. Hannah, the brilliant daughter climbing the corporate ladder. And Ethan, the lazy son who always seemed to get away with everything. They used to call me their daughter, but the truth is, I never once felt like I belonged. When I was little, I wore Hannah's hand-me-downs, clutching broken toys while she flaunted her brand-new dolls. At the dinner table, I was always the one shoved to the end, as if my place was more of a guest than family. By the time I reached high school, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Hannah got a scholarship to law school, praised and celebrated like the golden child. Ethan was handed the keys to a shiny new car the moment he turned 16. And me? I walked to school with a torn backpack, working late shifts just to scrape together enough for community college tuition. While they went on luxury vacations, I was counting coins to pay for textbooks. I learned early on that if I wanted a future, I'd have to build it myself. There was something else, though, something I never talked about. My biological parents, before they passed, had left me a trust fund, a safety net meant to protect me, to give me a chance at the life they could never provide. But I never saw a single dollar from it, not one. I thought I had already accepted my role as the outsider until that Thanksgiving night. Thanksgiving night. The Thompsons had chosen one of the most expensive restaurants in Columbus, Ohio. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, the sound of jazz floated through the air, and the tables around us were filled with laughter and clinking wine glasses. At the head of our table, Robert raised his glass to Hannah. "To my daughter, the youngest vice president this company has ever seen." Susan's eyes glistened with pride. Ethan smirked, swirling his drink. And me? I sat quietly at the far end of the table, sipping plain water, invisible as always. I had grown used to being on the margins, but that night they went further than I ever imagined. Hannah suddenly turned to me, her smile sharp as glass. "Emily," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "this table is for real family. Maybe you should sit somewhere else." Laughter erupted around the table. Even Susan lifted her hand to cover her mouth, though her eyes betrayed her agreement. I froze. My cheeks burned as I felt strangers' eyes on me, curious, pitying, some even entertained. In that moment, I wished I could disappear into the floor. But it didn't end there. When the meal was over, the waiter placed the leather folder on the table. Robert glanced at it once, then slid it across to me. "You're the youngest," he said smoothly. "You can handle it, can't you?" My fingers trembled as I opened it. The numbers blurred before my eyes. $2,800. Nearly a month's wages for me, and to them it was nothing more than a passing joke. Ethan shrugged, polishing off his wine as if the bill had never touched him. Hannah leaned back, her satisfied smirk cutting deeper than any blade. And I, swallowing hard, biting my lip to keep it from quivering, pulled out my card. My hand shook as I scrawled my signature across the receipt. The laughter died. For a moment, the room fell eerily silent. Then, from the other end of the table, Margaret, who had hardly spoken a word all night, placed her glass down with a sharp clink. Slowly, she pushed her chair back, the legs scraping against the polished floor. She stood, her cane steadying her frail body, her eyes scanning every face with icy precision. Her voice cut through the air. "Enough! The table went silent, no one dared move, and in that instant I realized that single word would change the course of my life forever. The sound of Margaret's chair scraping across the polished floor sent a chill down my spine. Every head at the table turned toward her. She stood frail but commanding, her cane steady in one hand, her wine glass in the other. Then she spoke, her voice low but unshakable. "I have made my decision. All of my estate will go to Emily." The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Robert's fork slipped from his hand, clattering loudly against his plate. His face went pale as if the blood had drained from it in an instant. Susan's cheeks flushed crimson, her lips trembling. Sister, what did you just say?" Hannah shot to her feet, her voice cracking in disbelief. No, that's impossible." Ethan chuckled nervously, wiping the sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting between everyone as if looking for an escape. And me? My jaw fell open. My heart pounded so loud I thought the entire restaurant could hear it. Wait, what? You can't be serious. In that frozen moment, I felt the world shift beneath me. My voice shook in my head. That was the moment. The world itself seemed to stop. Margaret's eyes swept across the table, sharp as glass, before landing firmly on me. "You may not understand now," she said, her tone steady, almost chilling. "But the truth cannot stay hidden forever." Around us, the other diners began whispering, craning their necks. "What's going on over there? Did she say fortune? Estate?" I gripped the silver spoon in front of me so hard my knuckles turned white. My pulse thundered in my ears. What truth was she talking about? Why me? Then Margaret lowered herself back into her chair, her face tightening as she pressed a trembling hand against her chest. She drew in a shaky breath and leaned toward me, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have much time left, Emily. The truth, it has to come out before it's too late." I stared at her, my stomach twisting into knots, fear mixing with confusion. And in that moment, I knew. Her words weren't just a gift. They were a warning. They were the beginning of a dangerous game I had never asked to play. The Thompsons wasted no time. That very night, in their glittering living room under the chandelier, they turned my existence into a trial. Robert slammed his palm against the table, his voice booming. "She's brainwashed, Margaret! That girl tricked her into everything!" Susan shook her head, pressing her hand to her forehead as if she were the victim. "Emily has always played the poor, pitiful orphan. Everyone falls for it." Hannah leaned forward, her eyes flashing with cold determination. "Let me handle this. I know exactly how to expose her." And as I sat alone in my apartment, silent, they were already building a new story, a story where I was nothing more than a manipulator. A few days later, Hannah slid a thick envelope across a desk in a dimly lit office. The private investigator barely looked up as he opened it, flipping through the money with a smirk. She dropped a photo of me onto the pile. "Find me something, anything," Hannah ordered, her voice razor-sharp. "I want proof she never deserved a dime." The detective narrowed his eyes at my picture, his lips curling into a thin smile. Soon the rumors began. "Foster child or fortune hunter," screamed a headline. On social media, strangers tore me apart. Whispers spread in coffee shops, colleagues huddled in corners, their voices just low enough to sting. I scrolled through comment after comment, each one sharper than the last. "She's been getting money from Margaret for years. She planned this from the start. Gold digger." And the worst part? A small broken part of me started to wonder if maybe they were right. One night, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. My stomach knotted as I opened it. Attached was a set of grainy photos. Fake, doctored images of checks, transfers, proof that Margaret had been secretly funding me for years. My hand shook as I stared at the screen. Every piece of evidence is against me. Or at least, that's exactly what they wanted everyone to believe. The glow from the monitor lit my face as I sat frozen, the weight of the lie pressing down on my chest. But what I didn't know then was that the truth was far darker than any rumor. The Thompsons didn't waste a single second. Inside a cold, sterile law office, beneath the glow of fluorescent lights, they signed away their loyalty and their dignity. Robert's voice thundered across the room. "Void the will. We're not letting her steal what belongs to this family." The lawyer nodded without hesitation, his pen scratching across the documents. I wasn't there, but I could imagine the sound, like the closing of a prison door. In their eyes, I had never been a daughter, only an intruder to be erased. Later that night, I walked home, my bag clutched tightly to my chest. The streets were quiet, but the silence felt heavy. Out of the shadows, Robert appeared, his face twisted with rage, his steps heavy as he cornered me in a narrow alley. He pressed a finger hard into my shoulder, his breath hot and venomous. "If you take a single cent of that fortune, you'll never know peace again. I will make sure of it." I froze, my body rigid. My heart raced so fast it drowned out the sound of his footsteps as he finally turned and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there trembling until the night swallowed me whole. When I finally reached Margaret's house, my eyes were red, my chest tight with fear. She waited in her chair by the fireplace, the room warm and golden, a cruel contrast to the chill I carried inside. She studied me quietly, then placed a thick folder on the table between us. Her voice was steady, though I could see the tremor in her hands. "There's something you don't know, Emily, and it's time you see it." My fingers shook as I reached for the folder. I opened it, and my world tilted. There, in bold print, was my name, my real name. Beneficiary, Emily Parker. Trust fund. The words carved themselves into my mind. I gasped, clutching the page, my pulse hammering. At that moment, I realized this fight wasn't just about Margaret's fortune. It was about my own past, about a truth buried long before I ever knew to ask for it. And that was only the beginning of the real shock to come. Margaret slid the folder across the wooden table toward me. Her frail hand lingered on top for a moment, then withdrew. I opened it, and my eyes widened with every page I turned. Line after line, transaction after transaction, all tied to one truth I had never known. Margaret's voice broke through the silence, low but steady. $600,000. That's what your parents left you. A trust fund meant for your future. But Robert and Susan took it all, every cent. They used it to raise Hannah and Ethan while you were left with nothing. The folder slipped from my hands and hit the table with a heavy thud. My chest tightened, my breath caught in my throat. All those years. The nights I worked double shifts just to afford textbooks. The mornings I walked miles to school while Ethan drove his brand new car. The humiliation of wearing Hannah's hand-me-downs. I staggered back, clutching my head. I worked myself to the bone. For tuition, for rent, for everything, while they spent my money on vacations, on cars, on her law school. Tears blurred my vision, but rage burned hotter than the shame. Margaret's eyes held mine, sad but unflinching. "This truth has been buried for far too long. Now you must decide what to do with it." I sat back down, my chest heaving, my hands trembling as I wiped the tears from my face. But something shifted inside me. Margaret leaned forward. "You have two choices, Emily. Stay silent or fight for what's yours." I stared down at the papers, my fists clenching. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of power, painful, heavy, but mine. And in that moment, my voice cut through the silence. "If your foster parents had stolen your childhood, your future, would you forgive them, or would you fight back?" My eyes hardened. The answer was already written in them. From that moment on, I knew I wasn't a victim anymore. The rain was still falling when I helped Margaret into the clinic. The sterile white walls glared under harsh fluorescent lights, every surface too clean, too cold. The steady beep, beep of a heart monitor echoed in the room, each sound making my chest tighten. We sat in silence as the doctor flipped through her chart, the tip of his pen tapping against the desk. I swallowed hard, glancing around at the machines, the white walls, the emptiness pressing down on me. I had never feared silence as much as I did in that moment. Finally, the doctor looked up. His expression was grave, his voice measured. "Her condition has worsened. The heart is failing faster than we expected. She only has a few months left." Margaret's eyes fluttered shut. She let out a slow, weary breath and then squeezed my hand with all the strength her frail fingers could muster. I sat frozen, the words crashing into me like a wave I couldn't escape. My lips trembled, but no sound came out. That sentence, it rang in my head like the tolling of a countdown clock. The monitor kept beeping, steady but unforgiving. The rain tapped harder against the window like a second hand ticking away. I stood, tears burning in my eyes, but there was something new behind them. "Resolve," Margaret whispered, her voice fragile but firm. "There isn't much time. You must be stronger than you've ever been." I nodded slowly, gripping the folder against my chest, the paper edges digging into my palms. In that moment, I understood. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. From that moment on, I could hear the clock counting down with every beat of my heart. The Thompsons launched their campaign like seasoned performers. Bright studio lights beamed down on them as cameras rolled. Robert's voice cracked with practiced sorrow. We took Emily in. We gave her everything, and now she's turned her back on us. Susan dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders trembling. Hannah wrapped an arm around her, lowering her gaze to the floor as if the shame were unbearable. I watched the broadcast alone, the remote trembling in my hand. Their faces filled the screen, dripping with crocodile tears, their words striking me harder than any weapon. They made themselves the victims, and me, the traitor, before the entire world. I turned off the TV, but the damage was already done. The next morning at work, the whispers started before I even reached my desk. One coworker leaned to another, eyes flicking toward me. A chair scraped backward, rolling just a little farther from mine. Fingers clattered on keyboards, but no one met my eyes. Later in the grocery store, I felt the stares cut into me like knives. A neighbor shook his head as he passed, muttering under his breath, "Ungrateful. Gold digger." I pulled my bag tighter against my chest, kept my head down, and walked faster. Every glance felt like a guilty verdict. That night, Margaret and I sat surrounded by stacks of papers and files, our table buried under the weight of evidence. Her cough rattled the quiet room as she pressed a hand against her chest, but her eyes stayed sharp. "We have to be ready," she said firmly. "One mistake and we lose everything." I nodded, forcing my shaking hands to organize the documents, every breath heavier than the last. Then, suddenly, the phone rang. The sharp sound made me jump. My heart pounded as I picked it up. A low voice came through the receiver. "Emily, I have information you need." My eyes widened. I turned to Margaret, her face etched with both worry and hope. I never imagined that the very man they hired to destroy me would reach out to me first. I gripped the phone tighter, my breath shallow, my pulse racing. I didn't know then, but that call was about to change everything. The cafe was dim, the air thick with the scent of roasted beans and rain. Water trickled down the window as I slipped inside, scanning the room. In the far corner, he sat with his back to the glass, coat collar turned up, a shadow against the glow of a single yellow lamp. I hesitated, then walked toward him. Without a word, the detective slid a thick envelope across the scratched wooden table. His eyes were sharp, his voice gravelly. "I worked for them once, but now I work for the truth." My breath caught. I reached for the envelope, my fingers trembling as I opened it. Inside were photographs. Robert signing documents, Susan clutching envelopes of cash, Hannah mid-argument, her face twisted with anger. Pages of records, damning and undeniable. My hand flew to my mouth. I thought he was against me, but all along he held the key to everything. He stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking softly. "They stiffed me, didn't pay a dime, and I don't work for liars." I nodded slowly, clutching the envelope tight to my chest, my pulse racing. The red herring they built to destroy me had just turned against them. Still, as I stared down at the evidence, a question gnawed at me. Even with the truth in my hands, was I about to destroy what little was left of a family? The papers lay scattered across my desk, the lamplight casting long shadows on the walls of my small apartment. My fingers dug into the edge of the folder, knuckles white, but I couldn't bring myself to open it again. Am I tearing a family apart, or simply taking back what was stolen from me? The silence pressed down like a weight, broken only by the ticking of the clock. I lowered my gaze to the worn photograph clutched in my other hand. Creases ran through it like scars, but the memory it carried was sharper than ever. I was 12 years old again. Snowflakes clung to my coat as I stood outside the Thompsons' glowing house. Through the frosted window, I watched them. Robert, Susan, Hannah, Ethan, all dressed in red and green, laughing under strings of lights as the camera flashed. I pressed my hands against the wooden frame, my breath fogging the glass. My eyes stung, tears blurring the image of the perfect family portrait I would never be part of. They never called me inside, not once. I turned away, my boots crunching in the snow, the sound of their laughter fading behind me. That year I stood outside the picture, and from then on, I never truly belonged. Back in the present, I lifted my head, staring into the mirror across the room. My eyes were swollen, raw from tears, but there was something else burning beneath them. I spoke in a whisper, as if asking the world itself, if it were you, would you dare fight for what was yours, even if it cost you the only family you've ever known? My reflection didn't answer. It didn't need to. I slammed the photo down on the table, the sound sharp in the silence, and in that moment my weakness hardened into resolve. I knew it was time to act. The courtroom buzzed with tension, every seat filled, cameras flashing outside as reporters shouted over one another. The judge raised his gavel. "Order in the court. We will now begin." The Thompsons' attorney strode forward, his voice booming with righteous indignation. "This is nothing more than a calculated scheme. Emily manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman in order to steal a fortune that was never hers." Robert and Susan sat stiffly, faces arranged into masks of grief. Hannah dabbed her eyes for the cameras, her expression a perfect picture of wounded pride. I sat at the defendant's table, head bowed, fingers locked together until my knuckles whitened. Then came the betrayal. The very lawyer who had promised to stand by me rose from his chair, on their side. He laid out a stack of fabricated emails, doctored documents, his voice dripping with false certainty. "These records prove she has been receiving secret payments for years. This was planned from the start." My lips parted in shock. No, it can't be." My chest tightened as the whispers of the gallery swelled. Even the one person I trusted had turned his back on me. Then, Margaret's quiet cough cut through the noise. Slowly, she slid a folder toward me. I looked at her, her frail frame trembling, but her eyes burned with fire. My new attorney, one Margaret had secretly arranged, stood tall and firm. "Your Honor, we have evidence to the contrary." He presented certified medical records confirming Margaret's full mental clarity. Then came the trust fund documents, proof that my parents had left me $600,000, siphoned away by Robert and Susan. And finally, the photographs. Captured by the very detective Hannah had hired, now turned against them. Images of Robert signing illicit documents, Susan pocketing envelopes of cash, Hannah's furious arguments over money. The gallery gasped. The judge's gavel slammed. The truth finally had a voice. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted. Reporters swarmed, microphones shoved forward, cameras flashing like lightning. On screens across the country, headlines shifted. Emily Parker, victim, not villain. The Thompsons' deception exposed. Online comments poured in. Maybe she's the real victim. We were wrong about her. They lied to everyone. For the first time, I lifted my head. I didn't flinch under the stares. I met them, steady and unbroken. The light was finally breaking through the dark. At the plaintiff's table, Hannah slammed her hand down, her face flushing red, fury boiling over. And I whispered inside my mind, I never imagined it would be their own anger that would bring everything crashing down. The courtroom was heavy with silence, every breath tight, every eye fixed on us. The judge leaned forward, waiting for the final words. My attorney laid down the last piece of evidence, his voice calm but firm. Across the aisle, Hannah's composure shattered. She slammed her hands against the table, her face blazing red. "That money was ours! We had every right to take it!" The words echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the cold walls. For a moment, no one moved. Then a collective gasp filled the room. Reporters leaned forward, cameras zoomed in, and the whispers erupted like a storm. The judge's gavel pounded. "Order! Order in this court!" But it was too late. The truth had already slipped free. Robert and Susan sat frozen, their faces drained of color. Robert's jaw clenched. Susan's lips trembled as she avoided the cameras trained on her. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My tears blurred the edges of the room as I whispered inside my own mind. I didn't have to prove anything. They confessed for me. My lawyer turned, seizing the moment. "Your Honor, you've heard it yourself. A verbal admission, before the court, on record." The gallery erupted again, the buzz of voices rising to a roar. The gavel struck 3 times. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. "This court rules the will valid and binding. Emily Parker is the rightful heir." He paused, then fixed his gaze on the Thompsons. "Furthermore, Robert and Susan Thompson are ordered to repay the trust fund they unlawfully used, with interest." The room exploded. Applause broke out. Reporters surged toward the doors, microphones already raised. Outside, the crowd cheered as headlines flashed across live broadcasts. The truth exposed. Emily Parker wins. For the first time, I sat tall, a faint smile breaking through the tears. For the first time, justice was on my side. Robert lowered his head in shame. Susan collapsed into sobs, her body shaking. Hannah screamed as officers restrained her, dragging her from the courtroom as her voice cracked into madness. Flashes lit up every window. The world was watching the Thompsons fall apart in real time. I turned to Margaret. She reached for my hand, her touch weak but steady. Our eyes met, and in hers I saw pride and sorrow. A single tear slid down my cheek, not of defeat, but of release. But victory always comes at a cost. The bells of the church tolled softly as candles flickered against the walls. Margaret's casket was covered in white flowers, her memory as delicate as the petals resting above her. I laid my hand gently on the polished wood, my body trembling, tears sliding down my face. I had lost the first person who truly saw me as family. Weeks later, under a bright morning sun, I stood before a ribbon stretched across a doorway. Behind me, a new sign gleamed, the Margaret Foster Foundation. With a single cut, the ribbon fell, and children from foster care rushed inside, their laughter ringing out like music. I smiled through the ache in my chest. From her legacy, I will give opportunities to children who were once like me. Months passed. On magazine stands, my face looked back at me. Emily Parker, from foster child to philanthropist. The cameras had captured my confident smile, but behind the gloss, I remembered every scar. Across town, the Thompsons dragged suitcases across the lawn of their foreclosed mansion. A for sale sign creaked in the wind. Robert's head hung low, Susan wiped at her swollen eyes, and Hannah glared at the ground as if rage alone could turn back time. Justice had been served, but justice always leaves scars. 1 year later, I stood on a stage beneath a single beam of light. The audience was silent, their eyes fixed on me. I took a breath, my voice steady, resonant. Family isn't where you're born. It's where you build it, with kindness. The applause was gentle at first, then thunderous. I stepped down from the podium and wrapped my arms around a little girl from the foster program, holding her close. The screen faded, my embrace on one side, the abandoned Thompson house on the other, its windows dark and hollow. And the question lingered, echoing in the silence. Was this truly justice, or just another form of punishment?